Absolute Solomon Grundy is incredible, and honestly, Absolute Green Arrow just keeps getting better and better. So, we do get an explanation of how Absolute Solomon Grundy came to be, and this actually opens up with the fight between Solomon Grundy and Dinah Lance, because lest we forget, the entirety of Absolute Green Arrow is basically a mystery on who Green Arrow is. We know that Oliver Queen is dead, so the question is that if Oliver's dead, then who is Absolute Green Arrow? Although there have been all these theories and rumors about the fact that Oliver has somehow been brought back, and that in being brought back, he's now operating as Green Arrow. I mean, honestly, Oliver has always been Green Arrow, so I guess it would kind of make sense. We do get an answer to that though, right? But the way this plays out here is that with Solomon Grundy facing off against Dinah, who's the one investigating all of this, she says, "Never be ashamed of being underestimated. Mom beat it into my head. Don't ever be ashamed, period. Not of yourself or of what you can do, because the world is on fire and is filled with people who need you to feel wrong so they can feel right. Anyone underrating you, they're handing you the edge, and that in that edge, you beat them over the head with it. And like Dad always said, don't ever let them see you flinch. Us Lances do not dole out that kind of satisfaction." Now, this is a pretty dope moment here, because we know that Dinah Lance has historically been a great fighter in DC Comics, if you're talking about the main DC universe, but seeing her face off against Solomon Grundy with nothing but her wits and a handgun, and still coming out on top, it's pretty phenomenal. Right, it's pretty phenomenal here, because with Solomon Grundy, I don't know that I would call him DC's Hulk, because he predates the Hulk by like almost 2 decades. However, he is very difficult to kill, if not full-on impossible, right? He's effectively the living dead, like a zombie Hulk type character. But the fact that he is so indestructible historically, but even with Dinah holding her own against him, there are differences, but it is kind of cool to see. I just like that. I thought it was worth mentioning. The problem is that in the middle of all of this, she lost track of Roy Harper. Now, Roy Harper was of particular importance to her and to us for a few different reasons. One, because with no one knowing the identity of Absolute Green Arrow, there's a short list here, right? And Roy Harper's on it. It's Roy Harper, it's Mia Dearden, and then it's also a guy named Tom Halloway, who we'll see here in a little bit. There is Connor Hawke, but Connor Hawke's not really part of the equation, or at least doesn't seem to be a meaningful contender for the role of Oliver Queen, or at least for Absolute Green Arrow, just because the relationship between him and his father was tenuous at best, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense that he would in turn take over the mantle of vigilantism that his father had in order to like uphold the memory of a man that he had so many problems with. But it's entirely possible, and that whole thing could be a red herring in a lot of ways. Mia Dearden, historically speaking, has been a member of the Green Arrow family in DC Comics, in the main DC universe, but the relationship between her and Ollie, like so many other people, is also tenuous, so there's no guarantee that it's her. And then Roy Harper is a guy who seems to be Absolute Green Arrow, and honestly, for my money, I would take that bet, and I'll explain why here in a second, because we get some pretty damning evidence to basically illustrate that it is Roy Harper in all of this. But what this does is it actually switches over to Green Arrow directly, because when she lost track of Roy, we end up picking up with Green Arrow, who's got the hand of Hector Hammond. Now, Hector Hammond, of course, the main guy behind all of this, we saw that Absolute Green Arrow cut off his hand in issue #1. And initially it just kind of seemed like he was just tormenting Hector, right? Literally just tormenting this guy, lopping his hand off, calling it a day. No. He needs it in order to access a fingerprint scanner, because what this does is it gives him all the information he needs. But the kicker about all of this is it feels less like Absolute Green Arrow is gaining this information for his own purposes, and it feels more like he's just unlocking the doors for Dinah Lance. Because what ends up happening is that once he gets to the computer system, uses the hand, and then unlocks and gains access to the computer, that you switch over to Dinah. And as she's making her way through this same facility, right, this is literally where she was facing off against Solomon Grundy, that Absolute Green Arrow is in the same place. She looks around and sees all these insane experiments of people in these grotesque forms. They've effectively just been twisted and turned into monsters. And in fact, she says that, right? Hammond is making literal monsters out of people. Why? Right? Answer that, get proof that he's involved. It doesn't matter how rich he is. This is how he finally goes down. But she ends up getting to the computer system that was unlocked by Absolute Green Arrow. And nothing's been done with it, right? It just says, "Thank you, Mr. Hammond. Would you like to continue?" So seemingly it was left that way for her, right? Just so she can access it and finally start getting answers. That's why I say it looks like Green Arrow is really more just clearing the path for her than anything else. Now, how do you explain him killing Zittel, right? Well, honestly, that kind of seems like a reasonable thing for him to do because it removes Zittel from the equation and makes it clear Zittel is not part of what's going on with Absolute Green Arrow. But again, we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get to it. But what goes on here is you actually end up switching over directly to Hector Hammond himself, right? Where he says, "We are so recent, they've only just made a word for us," right? Sent billionaires, cats with over $100 billion. And you think that you're tricking one of us, Tom, right? And that's where Tom says, "Mr. Hammond, you have to believe." And like Hammond cuts him off and says, "No, Mr. Halloway, the pleasure of being me is I don't have to do anything, especially for the maggot who gave me this," and like holds up basically a kind of robotic replacement for the hand that he lost. And the whole time, Tom's begging for his life, right? It wasn't me, it wasn't me. I am not Absolute Green Arrow. And the way this guy is begging, this scratches him off the list, right? Also because of another thing that's gonna happen. But this guy's clearly not Absolute Green Arrow. Number one, because you're just kind of seeing what's happening with Green Arrow himself doing his thing, and then in turn, right, Tom here just being tormented. It's kind of a hard sell to believe that Green Arrow unlocks, right, this computer of Hector Hammond, and then immediately gets captured and tortured. So it's clearly not Tom. But the fact is that in that moment, Hector Hammond cuts him off and says, "You were Queen's bodyguard, his BFF, ex-Special Forces. That's how you made our suspect list." And Tom just says, "Queen fired me, right? That smug bastard accused me of stealing. He destroyed my reputation. I wouldn't lift a finger for him. I swear." And the response of Hammond, as cold and callous as he is, because lest we forget, not only is he the main villain here, he's also the main villain in Absolute Green Lantern, which is really a great throwback to the old Green Lantern, Green Arrow stories. But the fact is, right, this guy is twisted. He looks over his shoulder and he says, "You heard of Dr. Eicher, right, sport? There's nobody bolder than the good doctor when it comes to reaching longevity escape velocity." Now, Dr. Eicher is an old school character in DC Comics. He's just a really old villain, and honestly, relatively obscure as far as I'm aware. This may be the most significant moment he's ever had in DC Comics, right, to be quite honest. But Hector Hammond continues on and says, "Edvin Zittel introduced us," right? You remember Edvin. You stuck him like a pincushion. The good doctor was not distracted by cellular rejuvenation like other schmoes. Eicher knew that the key was in cellular regeneration. All the other fat cats, Ra's al Ghul, Kale, Jack Grimm, they all think that they're big thinkers, but only I bought myself my own Dr. Moreau. But that's what's really going on here, right? That Eicher chimes in and says, "Pardon my appearance, but the N95 overly obstructs my speech," right? But yes, Hammond was generous enough to provide his Dr. Moreau an island in which to play, because life's problems are rarely solved head on. Play reminds us inspiration can be found anywhere. And he says, for example, the spider on your head. Arachnid bodies contain miracles, and if we put it upon ourselves to search for miracles, what do we see there? At what point do our biologies intersect? And that's where Tom is just like, "Why can't I feel my legs?" And in that moment, arms start sprouting out of his body, literally out of his chest and abdomen. And at that point, Eicher just says, "How can we know without play?" It's a pretty gruesome experiment that's going on here. But while Hammond is enjoying all of this, right, ironically enough, the way the art makes him look, he looks like J. Jonah Jameson. But while he's enjoying all of this, he says, "You took my hand, but I thought I'd be the bigger man and let Eicher give you basically some hands of your own." And that's when Dinah sneaks up behind him, right? And she says, no one has seen Hammond since the Green Arrow first attacked him, but he was hiding here the whole time. And in that moment, Hammond's caught by surprise. He didn't expect to see her here, which is ironic enough because technically Hector Hammond was the one that hired her. Technically he hired her through Malcolm Merlyn, but he hired her nonetheless. She's essentially gone off mission, right? The longer she's gone into this, right? The longer she's gone through all of this, the more she started to realize that the very man who hired her for her initial investigation is actually the bad guy in it all. And that's kind of the crazy thing, because in the face of the statement about how no one's seen, Hector Hammond for quite some time, she says, now I've got him, right? Combine all of this with what Harper told me earlier. And that is when she literally throws him on the ground and says, you created this island for Iker, but he needed subjects to test on. Fortunately, Jabal Slade was a friend with a history of human trafficking. Since Jabal was involved, Ollie thought this was about sex, basically, but that was not the case. Miraclo, what's this got to do with that? Because that's one of the things to keep in mind about the entirety of Absolute Green Arrow. At the outset, in the first 3 issues, the only thing that we really knew was that somehow Hector Hammond was in bed with Jubal Slade. Jubal Slade being the guy that helped Oliver Queen build Green Arrows, right? The app that he hoped, or at least Oliver hoped, would make the world better, right? Somewhere along the line, Jabal Slade ended up kind of getting in line with some pretty nefarious folks, which led him on the path to kind of becoming friends with Hector Hammond. And then suddenly Jabal Slade pops up one day with an island of his own. Now, the comic had clear allegories to everything going on with Epstein, but the fact is, that's what the comic was kind of presenting to us. Jabal Slade was that kind of a guy. He ran an island that shady people would go to and do some pretty disgusting things, when in reality here, that was the case, just not in the way everybody thought. It was an island of human experimentation. That's what they were doing here. They were just experimenting on people the entire time, and all of it seemed to be rooted in Miraclo, basically human enhancements, or at least modifications to the way the human bodies work and what you can do with them. But the funny thing about this is that when Dinah Lance asks about that, Hector Hammond's response, like Miraclo, Reese's uncle synthesized one of the world's most powerful steroids and gave it that stupid name, right? And that's where Iker speaks up and says, no, right? That's a part of it, but that's not the main focus. All Miraclo did was provide a rudimentary foundation to jumpstart dead cellular tissue in very specific subjects. Imagine our consternation when Oliver Queen fit the criteria. Unfortunately, we released his body back into society. So we reclaimed our property. And that's the crazy thing, right? All of this is going towards the idea that Oliver Queen really is Absolute Green Arrow. Because keep in mind, right, Hector Hammond and Absolute Joker and Veronica Cale, Ra's al Ghul, they all formed the Absolute Justice League. And the first assignment they had was for Hawkman in the Absolute Universe to kill Oliver Queen, which he did, bashed his head in with a mace, and brought his body into the boardroom and threw it on the table. That was the first indication that Oliver was basically dead and gone. And now the question became, who was Absolute Green Arrow, right? The kicker about all of this is that it seemed to put in the idea that he is alive, because one of the things that we saw in issue number 3, I think, was that Roy Harper dug up the grave of Oliver Queen only to find out the grave was empty. And so that kind of put us on to the idea that maybe it really is Oliver. But the crazy thing is that in hearing the body of Oliver referred to as their property, as opposed to him even in death being referred to as a person, this pisses off Dinah to no end. She literally shoots the good doctor in the leg, right? Like, this 9mm has what ails, or has a cure for what ails the good doctor, right? That's kind of nuts, a little taste of his own medicine. And that's where she just says, Harper was right, right? It wasn't enough that you killed Oliver. You defiled a good man's corpse for your insanity. And that's where the response of Hector, a good man, like, what are you talking about? Right? And that's where she says, Queen was 10 times the man that you'll ever be. And the response of Hector, oh, I knew Oliver Queen, and trust me, that annoying Edmund told me all about what he was really like, right? And that's when you switch to 2 years ago. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about Evan is that we don't really know anything about him. what we're going to get here actually does a lot of explanation to a degree, or at least shines a better light on him. But for the most part, all we really knew was that he was a guy who had owned a mansion that Connor Hawke had taken up residence in. And by the time Dinah Lance had caught up to Connor Hawke, the biological son of Oliver Queen, that Edvin Zittel had just basically been shot through arrows by Absolute Green Arrow. And like, that was it, right? He was just a guy who was dead, just another corpse. And so what it does is it switches over to the conclusion of a meeting between Hector Hammond, Edvin, and Oliver Queen. And so at that point, right, when Oliver's just like, bye, Hammond, right, like just literally sends him off and seems to do it without much interest in Hammond, like, bye, Felicia, like that kind of thing, that Hammond just says, come on, Ollie, you have to read the comments. And he says, anywho, Edvin, tell your dad, right? And that's where Edvin just says, yes, right? The king appreciates you making time for his son, Hector. And that's when Oliver talks to Edvin directly and says, what happened to No Psychopath Supper, right? And Edvin just says, Hector doesn't even hide the fact that he hates my guts. My dad told him to meet us, right? You know how tight they are. And so he says, besides, haven't you been saying that you want to spend more time with people who don't secretly resent you for your money? And in that moment, Ollie's just kind of like, I mean, yeah, right? Like Hammond he does it outright. I mean, what are you going to say, right? And so that's where, in looking at this kind of like video with Oliver Queen, he says, alpha male theater, what else can I do, right? Jabal's out of Green Arrows. Like, he's done and gone. I've donated money to victims groups. I've tried convincing his victims to press charges, but nobody trusts me. Right now, of course, this is a direct reference to Oliver Queen just beating the hell out of Jabal Slate, because once it came to light on what Jabal was doing, of course, Oliver couldn't keep him around. I mean, there's no way you can keep a person like that around, right? Somebody involved in trafficking? No, you can't keep a person like that or even keep associations with a person like that. That's heinous, right? Heinous behavior. Treating people as objects? No. Like, that cannot be tolerated. But that's the kicker, is he's done everything he can to restore his reputation in the general public's light. And the general public doesn't want to have anything to do with it, right? Their just hatred of anything like that is so extreme, he got caught up in it. And so that's where he's told by Edvin, Oliver, why do you care what anyone thinks? And Oliver just says, I know this sounds stupid, but I started Green Arrows because I thought it would help people, right? Star City is one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, where 1 in 4 people still live in poverty. And all my donations, have they changed anything, right? And so at that point, Edvin just says, what's the point of having all this money and all this influence when the world's crumbling around us? And he says, because people love a scapegoat, a boogeyman that they can hate and fear so they don't have to take responsibility for their own choices. And he says, right now, the end boogeyman is the rich. But mid-century America, Florence during the Renaissance, history is full of instances where elites push society forward, because for a lot of the world, just getting by is hard. So those of us for whom it isn't, even if we are hated and feared, maybe we just have to get over it, because we're still the most situated to make society better. Maybe that's why we have all we have, because we were meant to help save the world. Now, this is a really interesting and somewhat telling statement, right? Because he says, we just have to care enough. The strength of my entire country's economy was built around that philosophy. And for the past decade, my family's been purchasing increasing shares of your country's news and media companies so we can aid America too. Now, this is why I say it's such an interesting statement. And let's kind of start back right at this idea, right? People love blaming the wealthy so they don't have to take accountability for their own choices. Not necessarily, right? Like, for some instances out there, it really is a problem. Two things can be true at the same time, despite what the internet will tell you. The internet hates nuance, but it can be true at the same time. There can be people out there who just don't want to take personal responsibility, so they blame everybody but themselves. And rich people are easy to blame, so they blame them. But then there are other people out there who legitimately are in the situation that they're in because forces outside their control are actively working to keep them where they are. Both of those things can be true. But what's really interesting about this is a lot of what he says does have positive connotations, but it's also rooted in narcissism, right? The belief that he and people like him are the center of the universe, right? Shadows on the cave wall, so to speak, right? That they're the only ones who are real, and everybody else around them, well, they're not really as real or anything like that, right? Pawns in a game to be played. But that's kind of the irony of it, right? Because when he makes this statement, maybe that's why we have all we have, because we were meant to help save the world. It's almost kind of like this manifest destiny type thing, right? That they are divinely appointed to the positions that they're in order to help people. I don't know that that is a reasonable statement to make. However, there is all the merit in the world to saying that regardless of why they're in the position that they're in, they are in the best position to affect change. And that's why Oliver Queen is so important here, because everything that we're being shown about Ollie in these flashbacks show he is a legitimately good guy trying to do legitimately great things in the world, right? I mean, even sitting down and acknowledging the fact that all of his charitable donations have no real meaningful impact, the question became, then what does, right? As opposed to simply just saying, we'll give money to charities and it's not really going to do anything meaningful, but it's not about doing anything that matters. It's just about feeling good, right? And then just like pat himself on the back and call it a day. Virtue signaling, right? It's activism, but without all the hassle of like having to do anything meaningful or work hard or anything like that. That's not what he's doing, right? What he's doing is trying to find meaningful solutions to problems in the world. And honestly, regardless of whether there's bits of narcissism here or motivated reasoning or whatever the case is on behalf of Edvin Zittel, the important thing is he says, right, when he talks about the idea of Oliver, right, guy who wants to meaningfully change the world, and he talks about how his family's been buying up, news media companies and different things like that, that Ollie says, I would love to help with anything, but thanks to Jabal, my reputation is trashed. And so that's where Edvin just says, look, man, like you might not be grasping how much of your media we own now. The question is, do you want to help? And so the response of Ollie, I mean, like with what you're saying, it's interesting because lately I've been thinking I love my city and I've been considering it for a while now. I think I would make a damn good mayor, right, for Star City. And the response of Edvin, why would you want to become mayor when we can make you president, right? Because that's the nature of news media. The people only know what you tell them, right? And what they convince themselves to be true. And so when one guy controls all of that, then the people believe whatever they're told to believe. And if they're told to believe that Ollie is a great guy, right? That despite everything that went on with Jabal Slade, that Ollie is a guy who wants to meaningfully change the world, then the general public will start to believe it, which is kind of the kicker about it all. Right? I mean, it is manipulation and it is using things for nefarious purposes, or not really nefarious purposes, but for their own ends. But it is all for a good action. So it is kind of intriguing. It's a moral quandary and a philosophical quandary in that way. But at that point, you end up switching over, right? When you have everything going on with Dinah standing in front of Hector Hammond with a gun in his face, right? And that's where he says, I never wanted Ollie dead. He was one of us. Like, sure, he was annoying because he was a guy who was always trying to do good things in the world, helping people. What's his problem? Right? But literally, Hector says he always came around, right? So what that seems to indicate here is that, yes, Oliver always had the idea of trying to make the world better, but when it came down to it, he wasn't really trying as hard as he could have. But Dinah doesn't buy it. Right, she says steady, right? He's messing with you because it's over. Finally, for one of these bastards, consequences. And he says, right, literally Hector says, we were trying to help Ollie. I can take you to him. And that's where she's just like, what are you talking about, right? And he says, well, I see that you've met Iker's early tests, right? Our mindless Solomon Grundy, our flat and useless Jack Spratt. Those tests were all over the place. Iker could halt cellular decay, even regrow certain organs. But Iker never believed that Ollie was the key to achieving longevity, escape, velocity. He fits all the necessary criteria and more. Iker was giddy. Ollie had to be useful as more than spare meat, right? And so at that point, he yanks back this curtain and says, but even dead, Ollie found a way to flip me the middle finger, because quite literally, Ollie's just in pieces, right? Just sitting there on a table. So clearly Absolute Green Arrow is not Oliver Queen. And that's where Dinah sees this and it's just like, my God, right? Like you just chopped him up like he was beef, lamb, chicken, or something like that. You just treat him so callously, like just what a callous disregard of a corpse of the dead, right? And that moment, that kind of distraction is all Hector Hammond needs. He says, Grundy, this is Hammond, wake up, right? I brought her here, right? And he says, revive. And in that moment, literally Solomon Grundy pops back up again. In this instance, his body has gone through another mutation. He's just got like this giant gaping mouth, right? Like just in what looks like his back, or at the very least, right, his abdomen on one side of his body, right? And the whole time, Dinah's just like, Ollie's dead, right? Ollie's really, with all this talk of rejuvenation, that's crazy. Like, I really thought it was him. She really hoped that Absolute Green Arrow was Oliver Queen. Of course, in that moment, Solomon Grundy pops back up and going through a whole new set of mutations. The guy's like a Resident Evil monster, right? It's like sprouting these arms, tentacles, all kinds of crazy stuff. And she just says, right, what the hell is happening, right? Like, what is going on here, right? Solomon Grundy can't be the one who gets to come back, right? The one who gets to return, because now she stepped into this whole new dark world that she never knew existed. Humans being experimented on and monsters being the result. It is quite literally like Umbrella Corporation and Resident Evil, right? Nemesis. That's what you're getting here. And then just out of nowhere, Absolute Green Arrow shows up here, right? And she says, he knows where and how to place those arrows so he can stun the creature where bullets can't. But at worst, all even well-placed arrows could do is maybe shove him, and that's it. But that's exactly what needed to happen. He gets knocked back into a transformer, and it just electrocutes the hell out of him, right? But still, he says, Grundy, and he keeps coming. And at that moment, she's like, damn it, right? Like, come on. And she says, how does this monster move, right? It's made of muscles, so it has tendons, right? Tendons connect muscle to bone. But does that mean it has Achilles, right? That it has an Achilles heel? If we can slice that, then it can't walk. It loses that ability, at least in a meaningful way. And so that seems to be exactly what happened. She blows the Achilles tendon out of this guy's leg, right? Out of his foot. And he just kind of like collapses. But something that I want you to notice here, right? Roy Harper is nowhere to be seen, but Roy Harper was here, right? So this points to the idea that Roy Harper is Absolute Green Arrow, because the kicker about all of this, while technically Roy Harper was digging up the grave of Oliver Queen after Green Arrow had already shown up, that happened, that was our introduction to Roy Harper. And he seemed to be digging it up furiously, right? But it doesn't mean that he's not Absolute Green Arrow. It just means words seem to reach his ears that they dug his body up, right? And so he's going to verify. Honestly, I think it's Roy. Either that or it's basically Roy and Mia. But regardless, right? After all this fight with Solomon Grundy, that Dinah says, Ollie's really dead, which means I'm the only one who can make all of this right. And the whole time she just like grabs him, right? And just says, get up, right? Our only chance to face off, or at least to survive Solomon Grundy, is to seemingly run, right? To get out of here, recover, and then take the fight back to him. But that's when Hector shows up here and says, that's what's great about Grundy. He's persistent, right? The only one of our subjects that consistently resuscitates. I mean, sure, he's not ideal, right? And it costs millions to train him to follow superior brains. You could take some tips, young girl. And that's where she says, Hammond's threatened my father, bullied me, killed the man I used to love. I don't care what happens, right? I'm beating this guy. And then Hector Hammond, yeah, he's getting one to the dome piece. At this point, it's just vengeance, right? It's a vendetta. And so she says, but of course, in the midst of all of this, at the worst possible time, my migraines start flaring up. My vision blurs, my pain doubles, and hearing Hammond gloat, all I want to do is make him feel as much pain as humanly possible. But she says, I hold back because admitting that I'm hurt, that would make Hector Hammond too happy, and us Lances do not dole out that kind of satisfaction. There has to be a way to stop this thing, right? There has to be some way to do it. And so she says, come on, Arrow, right? Pull another trick out of your ass or something, right? Do something. And she says, all this can't have been for nothing, right? Finding the truth behind Oliver's murder, fighting back against Hammond, it has to lead to something meaningful, right? And so that's where Hector Hammond says, Grundy, that bastard took my hand, so take his. And that's the saddest thing about it all, is because she says, we can still pull off a win. We can still make a difference, even though in my heart, I know that we won't. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Yes, dude, I love Absolute Green Arrow. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.